About another 60 seconds, another 60 seconds. All right, about 10 more seconds, 10 more seconds. All right, cool. All right, so check it out. Who wants to go first? Like, what did you guys find for the number of, we should say spoken languages, right? Because there are dead languages that no longer are spoken. But what did you guys get for a number? Go ahead, Iona. Yeah, guys, if you want, just shout it out because I can't see everyone on
6,500.
6,500.
Yeah, I found that numbers were around about 7,000. Some numbers were lower, like the one that Taniko found. Some were even a bit higher. So.
Yeah. So, well, how about we say this? There's a range of languages because who knows exactly how many and how many of them are what are called like there are like I know there's one language and I forget what the name of it is, but there's only one native speaker who actually speaks it that's still alive. And people who study languages are actually trying to preserve it by recording the person and actually learning to speak the language. So let's say, it's a range, right? So let's say ranging. Everyone has the Google Doc open, right? All right, now how about this? I want different voices today. So give me some different, and notice this. Why do you think, okay? So if you guys looked it up, that's fine. But what I'm curious about is why do you think there are so many different languages? What's the, so really these two should be the same, right? So let's get rid of this one, but because those two are essentially the same. So why do you think there are so many? And that means what are the forces that cause the change? What do you think?
Hi, can I speak?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see. If everyone's waving at me, I can't
It's
see you.
always me.
Yeah, it's okay because I can see everyone. Taniko, go ahead.
I'm answering the first question though. Why do you think there are so many different languages?
Yeah. So give me one reason. Give me one reason.
Because there's so many different cultures and so many people in the world, and there's so many countries that have different languages and stuff. So yeah, thank you.
1 second. Just different. Did you say communities? Is that communities? And I'll say cultures.
Is it okay if I add on to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, girl. Per.
I'm not sure if this is actually the case, but in my opinion, it could have been for example, just like when languages were being created, I feel like language is created for, say, ease of communication, for example, and certain people might have found certain sounds more efficient to produce or easier to produce and stuff like that. So yeah, for example, there are sounds in certain languages that us English speakers don't even have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So ease of communication. What I'd like, can anyone think of a deeper reason? So these are very good. So different communities and cultures, countries, ease of communication. These are absolutely true. But can we go further back in time? So when I think of these two answers, and they're good answers, these I would say these are more recent. like more
Sir,
recent.
Google says it's because
I don't care about Google. No, no, no. I don't want to know about Google. Like I want you guys to think about this. Like
hey,
let's see older reasons. So I'll call this like older reasons.
sir, because
Can you
people
think?
got divided in the distance of time, so they were like,
Exactly. Come
let's
on, see
create
about
our
that. So
own
like
stuff.
the
And
people
also,
were.
So they ended up speaking two separate but related languages. You know.
Time, one at a time.
Shush, Nati, I'm trying to speak.
it's my turn. Can I speak, sir?
Hold on, I gotta. I can't write down at the speed that you're like talking. So hold on.
Sir, may I
People-
speak?
Yeah, so go like slowly so I can write. So people were.
Sir, people got divided by distance, and over time, their
Divided
languages changed. Their languages changed.
Good.
You know?
So like good. Yes. Anyone want to add to that? So give
Sir,
me
I'm
other
not done. Sir, I'm not done.
Oh,
Please.
no. Taniko, come on. I need other people. Like we can't have one
Oh,
person
okay. She can
dominate.
talk. It's fine.
Who's raising? Go ahead.
Me. Okay. I
Yeah, go
also
ahead.
think that. Okay. Well, I also think that they had different languages because sometimes like certain groups wanted to talk like to each other without having like other groups understand what they're saying.
So they wanted to gossip.
Well, well, let's say this. Like, so, Natalia, would you say that? How you said that again for me?
Sir, it's Nati.
Nati, thank you. Nati, can you help me out? Say it again.
Well, I said that maybe certain groups wanted to talk to each other without other groups understanding what they were like telling each other.
Maybe like private conversations. Like, we could say private or secret conversations, right? Does that represent what you're saying? Good, okay. Does anyone else want to chime in? Does anyone else want to answer?
Me.
Taniko, go. I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more. One more.
Also, it says that they end up speaking two separate but related languages. So, for example, Afrikaans and I think it's Dutch or something. They're like so similar, but like it's not the same thing, because they got divided.
So, yeah. So like, so what I want to do, so like, I want to relate this to what we're going to talk about today. We're gonna delete this. So the forces that are similar. Hang on a second. Let me fix this. So what I want to talk about today is like, what are the forces responsible for a variety of species? And they're very similar to why there are a variety of languages, all right? So one of the things that Taniko said is people were divided by distance, okay? And I'm gonna pull up a map here, 1 second. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, in this case, can you see that? Oops, hang on a second. See, I'm pulling up Google. Actually, hang on a second. All right, so hopefully you guys can see, I'm pulling up a map of China. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, does anyone know anything about the history of, well, first, actually, you know what? Let's stay here for a second. So, sorry, I'm learning how to use a mouse that is the opposite of what the mouse I use at home does. Hang on a second. All right, so humans, like modern humans, came out of Africa about 200,000 years ago. And if you can see the map that I have up right now, this is how the Earth was basically populated or peopled of our ancestors, excuse me, excuse me, moving out of Africa. So you'll see that there are two different locations in which we've been able to trace humans that are now spread out all over the Earth back to where we like first came from. So you'll see there were two different groups. One that started moving about 200,000 years ago, and one that started to move about 300,000 years ago. And they're both coming out of Africa. And if you look, they've taken slightly different routes. So one goes up from, where would this be? Like modern day Ethiopia maybe, or Tanzania. And they're moving up and some go into what is now Saudi Arabia, and then through India, and some go up and split off and go up into China. Others go into what is now modern Europe, okay? So over time, people, as Tanika was saying, languages, so we're talking about languages, not people, but languages change over time because people get spread out, and new words are constantly coming into existence. So what I'd like to do is, as like an analogy, right? Analogy. So new words are like, can you guys think of like in terms of like what we've talked about with, I'm trying not to use the word, what we've talked about with regards to genetics, what would new words be like? Let me give you an example.
Mutations.
Bones.
They could be mutations. Some mutations. Or can you think of like what else they could be? So like what is the thing on the DNA that is passed on between parent and their offspring?
Chromosomes.
Well, chromosomes, yes, but we say that the one thing, chromosome numbers within a species stay the same. So let's just make that as a note. Chromosome numbers.
Sorry, were you
Hold
referring
on one
to
second. Hold on.
alleles?
Wait. Hold on 1 second. Say it again.
Were you referring to alleles?
Yeah. So like mutations, and the thing I was thinking in particular were the alleles. So new words are like mutations, but like mutations themselves is like too general of a term. What we really want to think about is they're more like alleles. So like, oh, that's a bad arrow. There we go. So like, you remember like one word could be a gene, but a new variation of that word is an allele. It's a different form of the same word, or a different word for the same object. So the one thing I do want to mention, chromosome number, so the number of chromosomes within a species always stays the same. Okay, so that's important. The thing that does change are the alleles. So remember, genes are carried on the DNA, they're carried in the chromosomes, but the alleles can change. What the gene does, like, does it code for brown hair or blonde hair or blue eyes or brown eyes, that can change, okay, over time. And we're going to talk about how that changes today. Going back to this picture. So by getting separated over time, look at the times between like when people moved out of where modern day Ethiopia is. So 200,000 years, okay? Think about how many new words come into existence every single year, and then multiply that by 200,000. So you can get a lot of variation, all right? Going back here, so what were you saying? All right, questions so far? All right, so check it out. Back here. I'm just gonna grab some of my things. All right, so the first one, and we're not gonna spend a lot of time today talking about it, but natural selection, we're gonna spend like a whole day talking about it. All right, so the first force is natural selection. All right, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it today, just to talk about this is how species change over time. So they adapt. Okay, so if you would read through this slide with me, it says you have a population of deer. All right, you have a group of deer in this case, and they live in a warm climate, and just through individual variation, because everyone is slightly different, but some will have thicker fur than others. If something were to change, okay, let's say this population of deer were to move to the highlands or into the mountains in search of food, okay, or to escape from predators. Some deers are better adapted than others, all right? Some will survive longer in higher altitudes. Maybe they can breathe at higher altitudes with less difficulty, or in this case, some just have thicker fur than others. The ones with thicker fur are going to survive longer, or they have a better chance of surviving, and they're going to pass on their genes to the next population, to the next generation. All right, so in cold mountain climate, deer with thicker fur are more likely to survive. Why? They're not going to freeze to death. But here's what happens over time. If you compare like this first group here, this first population, to this group over here, after 1 or 2 generations, you're going to have more offspring, more deer with thicker fur. Why? Because it helps them to survive. All right. So some changes, in this case, this would be like an example of both distance and time. These deer are forced to a different location, and over time, the population itself will change. Okay. So the next one, make sure I go in order. All right, we said this. So where do those changes come from? Mutations. All right. Mutations tend to be random. And here's another really important part of, another important thing about mutations. Not all of them produce beneficial effects. Not every mutation is good. Some are harmful. Most have no effect. So most mutations have no effect on the population. Okay. So mutation, it's a random chance event. Mutations tend to be random, and most mutations have no effect on the population. Okay. Nature is pretty good at getting rid of, so let's say that natural selection tends to eliminate harmful mutations. Right. Now, something really important about that. There's something called, for example, so this is an example. So an example when does anyone know what Huntington's disease is? Disease. Does anyone know what Huntington's disease is?
I forgot what it is, but I heard it in the book.
Yeah, so like, well, let's do this. Everyone, well, actually, so Huntington's disease, the end result is if you have Huntington's disease, it's a genetic mutation. And everyone who gets Huntington's disease, actually, let's find the actual numbers. So can you guys still see my screen? Huntington's disease? I think it pretty much is everyone who gets Huntington's disease is going to die, and it's a genetic symptom. So, you know, we're gonna find a quick one. So if you look, Huntington's disease is mostly an inherited disorder that results in death of brain cells. So let's see if they have like a number of people that die from the year. So symptoms usually begin between ages of 30 and 50. Oop, I didn't mean to highlight that. Now let me ask you a question about that. When do most people, not everyone, but when do most families have children? Before or after the age of, say, 40 years old? What do you think? When do most parents have children?
Before, I think.
So like before.
And so as a result, people already pass on their genes to their children by the time this happens. And as a result of that, nature doesn't have a chance to eliminate this from the gene pool, okay? So there are some genetic diseases that will stay with our population, maybe forever, although there are ways now to eliminate this from the gene pool. And there may actually be gene therapy one day for those people who actually have the disease. Let's quickly look at the death rate for it. If you look at this, once you start showing symptoms, death is often about 10 to 30 years later. So the moment you start to show symptoms, the chances are you will die within 10 to 30 years. Okay, so if you have this disease, if you have 2 copies of it, you'll likely die within 10 or 30 years. Okay. All right, so that's an example of nature not selecting against a mutation or a mutation that has a harmful effect. Okay. And then the next one is gene flow. Okay, now gene flow it's actually pretty simple. Some people will move, and this wasn't so. Have you guys heard of invasives? Well, the invasive species would not be a good example. But what can anyone in the world do today that they could not do, say, 200 years ago? It's one of the reasons the pandemic is so bad or happened so quickly. What is the one thing people can now do that they could not do 200 years ago?
Travel freely or relatively?
Travel freely, but yeah, and like, so people can now get onto an airplane, right? And go from one country to the next, and then have children in another country, in another culture, with another group of people, okay? And so you can have genes that move into and out of populations, okay? So that is one of so right now we're talking about like why, what causes species to change over time. So I should have said that. Oh, actually, I said it right there. So what are the forces responsible for the variety of species that we have on Earth? All right, so natural selection is one. All right, mutation, so genes change over time through random chance. You have genes that move into and out of different populations of people, okay? And then the last two, keep going back and forth, is this thing called genetic drift. And there's actually two different types of this, okay? So this is just random change in allele frequency. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. Let me underline that though. Okay. And this occurs when, in a small population. All right, so I'm going to put up two different pictures here. Actually, I'm going to show you this first. All right, so this is, there are two different species of chimpanzee. There's actually a few more. There's like what we call subspecies. Who saw Planet of the Apes? And I can't see you all, so hang on a second. Who saw Planet of the Apes? Kind of raise your hand so I can see you. Planet of the Apes, American movie? Yeah, no? You guys still there? No one? All right, cool.
Wait, hello. What was the question, sir?
Who saw the movie Planet of the Apes?
Not me.
I think I saw one hand. Yeah. So
Me,
in
sir.
I hear you. It's all good. So in Planet of the Apes, hang on a second, my computer's freezing. There's one type of chimpanzee that they kind of, all the characters are modeled off of. It's this one. It's called Pan troglodytes. Okay. When you think of a chimpanzee, this species of chimpanzee is usually the chimpanzee people think about. There's another type of chimpanzee, and it's a very popular, or very famous one called the bonobo. And if you look, there is a difference, at least on the outside, physically between these two species. They are different species, and they actually can reproduce together. So the species are similar enough that they can actually produce living, like live offspring. But if you look, these are two different males. So this is a pan male, a troglodyte male, and this is a bonobo male. All right. And if you look at the bonobo male and the female, they're both smaller than the other two. Okay. So they are smaller, they're slightly different. And the reason this happened, hang on one second, is because they were actually separated geographically by, it's called the Great Rift Valley. But first, let me pull up. So if you look, get back onto the right one. So this like, I don't know if you'd call that like a teal color. This is where you can find bonobos now. And then the other colors, these are like the what we call the Pan troglodytes species. But the part I really want to focus on is you had a sub-separate species be created over time because they were geographically separated from all the other species of chimpanzees. And this didn't happen overnight. This happened over hundreds of thousands of years. And what basically happened was, and this map doesn't show it very well, but there was a river that cut the population in half, okay? And that's where these two different species over time evolved into separate species. So kind of go into this next one. So the first one, let's talk about just what's called the bottlenecking effect. Okay. And I have two slides for this one, two pictures. All right, so this is like one example of like a bottlenecking effect. So on this first one, you'll see that like, like these would be like red beetles, I guess you could call them. So there's an equal number of both red beetles and blue beetles. Through random chance, let's say half the population gets wiped out or killed or just die off due to disease. And you're only left with maybe one blue beetle, right? In the next generation, so like the difference between each of these is a generation, okay? You now have more red beetles able to reproduce. As a result, the next generation is going to have a lot more red beetles. And in this case, the blue beetle population might die out. And if you think they're both the same species, but the difference is one is a different color. Imagine the same thing with, imagine these were people, and the blue ones were people with brown hair, and the blonde ones were people with red hair. And if all of the people with brown hair, or most of them, die out or are killed, then you're going to have the next generation with mostly red hair. Okay. This happens, I don't want to say a lot, but it actually it happens very often. There is a population of people that like when people resettle onto islands, this tends to happen. All right, so one thing here. Okay, so if you look at what it says is, occurs when a population suddenly gets smaller, okay? You know, you have something that was killed off, like a large number of people within a population that are die out, okay? And then the last one, let's check the time here. Okay, we only got it. Okay, we have time just for the last one. What did I do with that? All right, so the founder effect. This is what I would like you guys to do. So we have, all right, so we have 6 minutes. I want you to Google founder effect, and I want you to find one case of the founder effect that affected humans. Okay, so hang on one second, let me write that down. This is what I want you to do right now. Find one example. Let me get this out of my way. Well, actually, let's call this homework too. So homework. Oops. So I want you to find one example in which how do I say this? So find one example in which a human population, so that's like a group. Find one, should write example, which a human population, should say gene pool. There's like way too many windows that you guys can't see open on the screen. Was changed by the founder effect. Okay. There's actually a few very famous cases of this happening. So this is what I want you to do. Find one example. You could find 2 or 3, but find at least one example in which a human, hang on a second, in which a human population's gene pool, that is all of their genes, all of their alleles within the population, was changed by the founder effect. Okay. Does everyone have that written down?
Yeah.
Well, it's like going to be on our notes, but hang on one second. Get some of these windows out of the way. All right, so that's going to be your homework for today. Find one example. I can think of off the top of my head at least 3 examples. So like we should have some variety. Okay, so try to find at least one example for homework. All right. Any questions?
No.
No? All right. So with that said, you guys are all free to go. I think class is done. All right. So I'll see you all on Monday. Okay. So make sure you have this on Monday.
Oh,
Goodbye.
bye.
Did I hear a
Sue.
question? Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Everything's freezing up. Ania, do you have a question, Ania? Or are you just frozen?
I think that she's frozen.
Oh, okay. How are you doing, Iona?
I'm doing well. I was just wondering. I think that you can stop recording now. Now that it's like after class.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Hang on a second.
Yeah, no worries.